Something has been happening in Portugal over the last few years that is something we rarely see in the world. An economic experiment that is drastically transforming the economy faster than almost any other country on the planet. Some say this experiment is giving Portugal an economic outlook similar to that of Dubai before its major transformation, while others are saying that this new economic pivot will end up being the downfall of the entire nation. But first, let's take you back to Portugal in the 1960s. You see, Portugal was ruled by the Estado Novo dictatorship. Pretty repressive, but also presiding over a booming late colonial economy. The African colonies like Angola and Mozambique were, ironically, doing great business in oil, diamonds, coffee, you name it, even amidst the colonial war of 1961 through 1974. Also, fast growth at home in Portugal pushed Portuguese living standards up in the 1960s. GDP per capita climbed from only 38% of the Western European average in 1960 to over 56% in 1973. Things were looking great for Portugal, pretty rosy, or should I say, carnation red. Because then came the Carnation Revolution in 1974, a military coup with flowers in gun barrels. Nice on paper, but economically, not so nice. The new leftist junta immediately nationalized banks and industries en masse, while the overseas empire collapsed. Over 1 million retornados, also known as returnees, fled the former colonies back to Portugal, often destitute. And so what happened? Economic chaos in Portugal. Factories ground to a halt, GDP shrank, and inflation went through the roof. Portugal's fledgling democracy had to be bailed out twice by the International Monetary Fund in 1977 and 1983 just to stabilize. So pretty much in the 1970s, right at the end of Portugal's colonial empire, they started off their new economy on hard mode, in a sense. By 1986, Portugal caught a lifeline by joining the European Economic Community, also now known as the European Union. European funds started pouring in, and modern highways and infrastructure popped up like spring flowers. Through the late 1980s and 1990s, the country enjoyed robust growth, with a hiccup in 1992 to 1994 though. But we fast forward to the 2000s, Portugal adopted the euro, and briefly rode a credit-fueled economic wave. But under the surface, trouble was brewing. Low productivity and mounting debt set the stage for an economic downturn. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, Portugal slid into a deep recession. Between 2008 and 2013, GDP plunged to nearly 8% from its peak, and unemployment skyrocketed to, get this, 17.5%. With youth unemployment at 40%. Youth unemployment was at 40% during this time. Now in 2011, drowning in debt, Portugal took a 78 billion euro bailout from the EU and IMF, the dreaded Troika program. Austerity became the name of the game. Budget deficits near 10% of GDP were slashed, but at the cost of immense social pain. Hundreds of thousands of Portuguese, possibly 500,000, emigrated in those crisis years, seeking jobs abroad. It was a national trauma. By 2014, the economy was just sputtering back to life with 0.something% growth, depending on the year. Little did anyone know, Portugal was about to attempt a bold, new economic strategy, essentially trying to reinvent itself as the Dubai of Europe. Although, minus the skyscrapers and indoor ski resorts that Dubai has. You see, around 2015, Portugal's fortunes started to turn. A new socialist-led government under Antonio Costa came in. And instead of doubling down on austerity, they took a more easygoing approach. Some dubbed it austerity, but, with a smile this time. The timing was perfect. Europe's economy was recovering, and Portugal's GDP began to grow steadily after 2014. Year by year, the country chipped away at its 11% deficit from 2010, and shrinking it to under 3% by 2017. In fact, by 2019, Portugal achieved something historic, a budget surplus. Now, it was of only 0.2% of GDP, but it's a start. But it wasn't just bean counting that changed Portugal's vibe. The country basically said, let's invite everyone else to Portugal's party, and opened its doors to foreign money like never before. One major tool was the Golden Visa scheme, which started in 2012 and revved up later on, essentially a buy a house, get a residence deal for wealthy non-European Union folks. By 2019, this scheme had attracted a cumulative $7 billion in investment. A huge chunk of it was in real estate. In fact, between 2013 and 2019, about 14% of all foreign direct investment into Portugal came via golden visas. Sure, critics noted that amounted to under 0.4% of GDP, a tiny economic ripple in exchange for a big property wave, but it did kick off plenty of luxury condo projects and renovated townhouse Airbnbs. If Dubai sells flashy skyscrapers to the world, Portugal was selling golden sunsets from Lisbon balconies. Now, hand in hand with that, Portugal launched tax breaks and residency perks to lure global elite. And also the pseudo-elite, but we'll get to that. A non-habitual resident, also known as NHR, tax regime gave foreign retirees, crypto bros, and remote workers a sweet 10-year tax holiday on most income. By the late 2010s, you couldn't stroll through Lisbon's historic Alfama or Porto's riverside without hearing French, English, German, basically a United Nations of hip expats living la vida loca on crypto gains and California remote salaries. The government also boosted programs for digital nomads, by 2022 offering a dedicated visa for remote workers with a decent income. Essentially, if you've got United States dollars or Bitcoin, come spend it under the sun in Portugal. Meanwhile, during this time, tourism exploded. Portugal's biggest Dubai-esque move was becoming a premium travel hotspot. In 2019, Portugal had more tourists than it had inhabitants. Over 10 million visitors, exceeding the country's 10 million people. By some counts, including all hotel stays, it was even higher. Some say that even 27 million people visited in 2019, which is just bonkers. That's 3 times the population of the country. Budget airlines and Instagram influencers made Lisbon and the Algarve coast the places to be. Surfing in Ericeira, clubbing in Bairro Alto, wine tours in Douro, Portugal was in. Tourism swelled to about 15% of GDP pre-pandemic, bringing in billions of dollars. This influx of cash helped fuel annual GDP growth to around 2 to 3%. It also drove unemployment levels down to levels not seen since the early 2000s. By 2018, joblessness was 7%, down from 17% in 2013. This entire era was called the Lizboom. It saw derelict city center buildings turned into boutique hotels and Airbnb rentals at a crazy pace. Foreign celebs and investors, even Madonna was spotted house hunting in Lisbon, by the way. They all bought up properties. It's as if Portugal looked at Dubai's real estate playbook and instead of constructing artificial palm islands, they said, let's renovate some 18th century azulejo tiled apartments and sell them to millionaires. Economically, the 2015 to 2019 period was a mini golden age. Decent growth, controlled deficits, booming exports, which was largely wine and footwear, and a newfound reputation as a tech and startup hub. Web Summit, a major tech conference, even moved to Lisbon. But of course, things came to a halt in 2020. The pandemic hit Portugal's tourism-dependent economy like a giant wrecking ball. Cue Miley Cyrus. Now, in 2020, GDP contracted roughly 8%, undoing years of gains, and the beaches and fado houses fell silent. But unlike some pessimist fears, the shock was just temporary. By 2021 and 2022, Portugal came roaring back with a record growth. 2022's GDP jumped 6.7%, the strongest in 35 years, powered by revenge travel and pent-up domestic demand. Tourists poured back in. By summer of 2022, the Algarve and Lisbon were packed, and by 2023, foreign visitor numbers exceeded even 2019's record levels. One Reuters report noted 18.3 million foreign tourists in 2023, 19% more than in 2022. Portugal's economic Dubai-like strategy kept going. They kept attracting more capital, talent, and tax haven seekers, while also betting on the economy's services. The Golden Visa program kept growing, but they expanded it into investments in businesses and not just real estate. Big multinational companies and celebrities took notice. Google opened offices in Lisbon. Germans and Brits bought vineyards in the Douro, and the crypto crowd made Lisbon a top destination. In fact, some people say that they saw a rapid spike in Lamborghinis double parked in Portugal during this time. However, during this time, real estate prices surged. More on that in a little bit. But construction cranes became part of Lisbon's skyline. There was even talk of mega projects like a new airport for Lisbon to handle the spike in new visitors that they've been seeing, and giant foreign-led investments. In fact, by the end of 2023, there were proposals for a lot of business deals, from luxury resorts to high-speed rail links. Foreign investment was not just about tourism and housing anymore. I mean, in 2021, Volkswagen announced a hefty expansion of its Auto Europa plant, and plans emerged for lithium mining and battery factories to leverage Portugal's resource wealth. And in fact, during this time, Portugal turned around from being a Euro crisis poster child to one that people might case study as a really nice economic turnaround. It was doing a budget surplus, attracting the rich and famous, and setting tourism records. But beneath the champagne and confetti of this Portugal is the new Dubai of Europe party, some cracks were starting to show. Cracks that would become more obvious as the years went on. You see, on the streets of Lisbon, Porto, and beyond, tensions were brewing beneath the glossy economic stats. The cost of living had soared. By early 2023, inflation hit around 8%, painful for a country where salaries were relatively low. More starkly, housing costs went through the roof. In 2022 alone, house prices jumped 18.7%, just in 2022. The biggest spike in over 30 years. Rents followed suit, rising by double digits, and for locals earning local wages, this was just a nightmare. One study ranked Lisbon the world's third least viable city to live in when you weigh in rents against incomes. It's a bitter irony. Portugal wanted to become a haven for the affluent, but in doing so, it was making life hard for its own people. By 2023, more than 50% of Portuguese workers earned under €1,000 a month, while the average rent in Lisbon for a one-bedroom apartment was easily €1,200 a month. You can do the math there, guys. It doesn't add up if you were living there and weren't a rich person that was making money from overseas. The public backlash became impossible to ignore for the government. Starting in 2022 and intensifying in 2023, thousands of people hit the streets in protest, not against dictatorship like it did in the 1970s or austerity in the 2011 protests, but against the ironic side effects of an economic miracle. Crowds chanted about unaffordable housing and enough of low wages. In one protest in Lisbon, organizers highlighted that many families now spend over half their income, if not 80 to 90%, just on rent. The government, feeling the heat, scrambled to respond. By late 2023, even the pro-investment Prime Minister Costa admitted some policies had been overshot. He moved to end the Golden Visa program, acknowledging it was driving up real estate prices too much, and announced the NHR foreign tax break would be closed to new entrants, calling it an unjust policy that inflated the housing market. These were stunning reversals. Essentially, Portugal was saying, okay, maybe we attracted too much of the Dubai crowd, and we didn't do enough to tackle affordability. However, even though they rolled those programs back a bit, they still kept the digital nomad one there. The reason being that if you are a digital nomad and you're opening up your small business in Portugal, you are still a net positive for the economy versus affordability. However, at the same time, Portugal continued chasing big investments to transform its economy for the long haul. A standout example came in early 2025. A Chinese company, CALB, announced a massive €2 billion EV battery gigafactory in Sines, or Sines. The project promises 1,800 jobs and could eventually add 4% to the total GDP of the country at full capacity. A huge industrial boost for a country that has often leaned on tourism and services. Now, this is part of a broader strategy. Leverage Portugal's lithium reserves and renewable energy potential to become a key player in Europe's green economy. Think of it as Portugal adding a little bit of Abu Dhabi to its economy and becoming a little bit more of an energy powerhouse. Other mega projects in the pipeline include new wind farms, possibly a green hydrogen plant, and continued expansion of tech hubs. The hope is that these investments will create higher paying jobs and diversify the economy beyond selling lattes to digital nomads and pastéis de nata to tourists. As of 2025, Portugal stands at an interesting crossroads. On one hand, metrics are solid. Unemployment is low, debt's coming down, GDP is growing, about 2 to 3% this year potentially, and even average incomes inching up after a long time of stagnation. The government even reported household incomes rising over 6% recently, one of the fastest in the entire European Union. On the other hand, social fractures are still visible. Young professionals are still struggling to afford a home, nurses and teachers striking for better pay, and locals in Lisbon feeling squeezed out by Airbnb and expats. Portugal has essentially done phase 1 of its Dubai strategy: attract foreign money, attract attention, and then go from there. Now it faces phase 2, making sure this prosperity actually benefits its people and is sustainable. There's cautious optimism in the air. Many Portuguese take pride that their country is now on the map for innovation and investment. The brain drain, meaning people leaving Portugal, has slowed. In fact, many of these people returned to Portugal lured by new tech opportunities and so on. And there's a sense that if policymakers can navigate the housing crisis and invest in education and productivity, Portugal could truly cement itself as a transformed economy from the sick man of Europe to a sort of Atlantic tiger. So will Portugal end up as the Dubai of the West? Possibly not in skyscrapers or bling, but Portugal's style is a little bit more laid back and low-rise. But in terms of punching above its weight economically and reinventing itself, it has come pretty far. The coming years will tell if the country can keep the balance, welcoming wealth without alienating locals and growing the cost of living. But for now, the nation remains sunny with a chance of irony. A place where you can sip a €15 cocktail on a Lisbon rooftop alongside crypto millionaires and a tourist from Texas. Portugal's economic story has become one of the most intriguing ones in the world, and it is one to keep an eye on for the future. Now, make sure to check out my YouTube Creator Academy in the link down below if you want to learn how to grow your channel and make videos just like this. But for now, make sure to click on my documentaries playlist to watch more videos like this that I have made. And for now, I'll see you guys in the next few seconds when you click on that playlist. Bye-bye.